Gene Autry. When you picture the Wild West, you might see a cowboy on horseback, guitar in hand, crooning under the stars. But behind Gene Autry's southern drawl and radio hits was a mind sharper than any six-shooter in a saloon. Gene Autry wasn't just a beloved performer. He was a machine of reinvention. Starting his career in the 1930s as the singing cowboy, he became a household name through radio, movies, and early television. But here's where it gets interesting. Autry didn't settle for fame. He went after ownership. As other stars chased roles, Gene was chasing equity. He founded his own production company, controlled the rights to his own shows, and invested heavily in media, decades before content ownership became a buzzword in Hollywood. His instincts were uncanny. He bought radio and TV stations, and even expanded into real estate and sports, becoming the original owner of the Los Angeles Angels baseball team. By the time of his death, Gene Autry's fortune was valued at $57.1 million, which today translates to a jaw-dropping $500 million. What makes Gene's story so compelling isn't just the number, it's the foresight. He saw the value in vertical integration before anyone else. While others were simply actors, he was building an empire brick by brick, deal by deal. Autry's legacy reminds us that in the golden age of Hollywood, the smartest player in the room wasn't always the one in the spotlight. It was the one who owned the spotlight. Greta Garbo. She didn't say much, but when Greta Garbo spoke, Hollywood listened. Mysterious, aloof, and utterly captivating, Garbo was one of the first true screen goddesses. But behind her famously private persona was a woman who understood something many in Hollywood never quite mastered: the power of walking away at the right time. Discovered in her teens, Garbo rose to fame in the 1920s and quickly became MGM's crown jewel. By 1928, she was commanding $270,000 per film, an astronomical figure that, in today's dollars, equals millions. At the peak of her career, she had amassed a net worth of roughly $3 million, which would be $40 million today. But here's the twist. Garbo didn't blow her fortune on mansions or parties. She chose solitude over spotlights and spent her post-Hollywood life making incredibly smart investments, especially in art and the stock market. While others partied through their paychecks, Garbo quietly built a portfolio that would make any Wall Street banker proud. She avoided interviews, red carpets, and public drama. She didn't need the noise. Her wealth wasn't loud, it was lasting. Greta Garbo teaches us something rare. That true power isn't always in being seen, but in knowing when to disappear and still leave the world talking. Her mystique became her brand, and her financial legacy proved that silence can indeed be golden. Lucille Ball. Before Netflix deals, before production empires, before anyone believed a woman could run Hollywood, there was Lucille Ball. Best known as the star of I Love Lucy, she wasn't just America's sweetheart, she was the engine behind one of the most powerful production companies in television history. Lucille made the world laugh, sure. But what many didn't see was the genius behind the curtain. Together with her then-husband, Desi Arnaz, she co-founded Desilu Productions, a move that gave them full ownership of their content. This wasn't just clever, it was revolutionary. Desilu would go on to produce iconic series like Star Trek and The Untouchables, and Lucy became the first woman to lead a major TV studio. At the time of her death, Lucille Ball's fortune was valued at $50 million, which today equals about $450 million. But her true value goes beyond dollars. She proved that comedy and command weren't mutually exclusive, that a woman could be both funny and fierce in the boardroom. Lucille broke barriers not just with laughter but with leadership. She was a masterclass in how to turn charm into ownership and talent into long-term legacy. Her influence still echoes in every actor who dares to take control of their own career. George Randolph Scott. He wasn't the loudest man in the room. In fact, George Randolph Scott built his legacy with the same stoic strength that defined his on-screen cowboy roles. But while he was gunning down outlaws in the American West, he was also quietly becoming one of the wealthiest stars of his time. Between the 1930s and 1950s, Scott appeared in over 100 films, most of them westerns. Audiences admired his unshakable presence, but few realized he was making smart, calculated moves off-screen. While many actors were living fast and spending freely, Scott was doing something unusual in Hollywood. saving and investing. He poured his earnings into blue-chip stocks and real estate, especially in Southern California, just as the region was booming. By the time of his death, his estate was worth $25.1 million, which balloons to a staggering $220 million today. Scott didn't need scandals or the spotlight to build wealth. His power came from discipline. He avoided the typical Hollywood lifestyle, choosing instead to build a future that would outlive the glitz of the movie business. In a town obsessed with appearances, George Randolph Scott proved that quiet confidence and long-term thinking can win the game. He may have played the lone rider, but in real life, he was a financial architect, one who rode off into the sunset with a fortune and a legacy of unwavering control. Audrey Hepburn. She floated across the screen like a dream, delicate, graceful, unforgettable. But behind Audrey Hepburn's doe eyes and iconic fashion sense was a woman of strength, conviction, and deep purpose. Audrey wasn't just a star, she was a symbol. From Breakfast at Tiffany's to Roman Holiday, she captivated the world with her effortless charm and emotional depth. But while her film roles made her famous, it was what she did after the cameras stopped rolling that truly defined her. At the time of her passing, Audrey's fortune was estimated at $55 million, an equivalent of $481.3 million today. But unlike many of her contemporaries, her wealth didn't come from massive contracts or business empires. It came from smart management, timeless branding, and most of all, a global love for her authenticity. Later in life, Audrey stepped away from the spotlight to serve as a UNICEF Goodwill Ambassador, dedicating her final years to humanitarian work. She visited war zones, comforted children, and used her voice to bring awareness to global suffering, never once asking for applause. Her style became legendary, but it was her compassion that made her eternal. Audrey Hepburn reminds us that true wealth isn't measured only in dollars, but in dignity, generosity, and the lives we touch. In a world that often equates fame with power, she stood for something else entirely: grace with grit. Bob Hope. When you think of Bob Hope, you probably imagine the quick wit, the signature golf swing, or his countless performances for American troops overseas. But what you might not know is that this beloved entertainer had one of the sharpest business minds in Hollywood history. Hope's career spanned radio, film, television, and live performance. He was a master of reinvention before it became a survival skill in showbiz. But his real genius wasn't just in telling jokes. It was in knowing where and when to invest. While others were buying flashy cars or throwing extravagant parties, Bob Hope was buying land. And not just any land. Prime real estate in Southern California, at a time when it was dirt cheap and wide open. He snapped up massive tracts across Los Angeles and Palm Springs, slowly building a portfolio that would dwarf even the most successful actors' paychecks. At the time of his death, Bob Hope's estate was valued between $700 million and $1 billion. Adjusted for today, that's somewhere between $6.1 and $8.75 billion. Yes, billion, with a B. He joked that he made more money from his golf swing than from his punchlines, and honestly, he wasn't wrong. Bob Hope's legacy is a reminder that even in the business of laughter, strategy matters. He proved that you can be funny, generous, and wildly successful, all while building a fortune that even Hollywood couldn't script. Joan Crawford. Joan Crawford didn't just survive Hollywood, she dominated it. In an era where actresses were expected to smile, comply, and fade gracefully, Joan did the opposite. She sharpened her ambition like a weapon and carved out one of the longest and most lucrative careers of her generation. Her journey wasn't built on luck, it was built on reinvention. Starting in silent films, she seamlessly transitioned into talkies, then melodramas, then powerhouse roles like Mildred Pierce, which won her an Oscar and cemented her status as a dramatic heavyweight. But Crawford wasn't just acting, she was negotiating. She famously struck lucrative contracts with MGM and later Warner Brothers, always ensuring that she remained both on-screen and in control. At the time of her death, her fortune sat around $2 million, equal to about $17.5 million today. Modest compared to some of her peers, yes, but every cent was earned through strategy, not scandal. She lived by one rule: love me or hate me, but don't ignore me. And no one ever did. Joan's story is one of transformation, resilience, and fearless self-preservation. She wasn't born into royalty, she built her throne. And while the industry changed again and again, Joan Crawford remained a constant. Fierce, flawless, and always 5 steps ahead. Cary Grant. Cary Grant had the kind of charm that made everything look easy. His smooth voice, his effortless timing, that signature smirk. But make no mistake, behind that debonair exterior was a man who changed the business of acting forever. In the early days of the studio system, most actors were locked into rigid, low-paying contracts with very little creative freedom. But not Cary. He became one of the first true free agents in Hollywood, choosing his own roles, his own directors, and most importantly, his own deals. Instead of just collecting a flat fee, Grant negotiated for profit participation, a model now standard among A-listers, but revolutionary at the time. He knew that true power wasn't just in front of the camera, it was at the negotiation table. At the time of his death, his estate was worth about $60 million, which translates to $130 million today. And while that number is impressive, what matters more is how he earned it, through intellect, leverage, and a refusal to be boxed in. Cary Grant didn't just perform in films, he performed a masterclass in creative autonomy. He paved the way for generations of actors to take ownership of their art, their time, and their worth. In a world of stars, Cary was a strategist. His greatest role, playing himself on his own terms? Doris Day. Behind Doris Day's wholesome image was a woman who faced betrayal, heartbreak, and financial devastation, and still came back stronger than ever. At the height of her fame in the 1950s and 60s, Doris Day was a box office powerhouse and recording sensation. But while she was charming the world, others were emptying her bank account. After the death of her husband and manager, she discovered that her entire fortune had been mismanaged and nearly vanished. For many, that would have been the end. But not for Doris. With grace and grit, she rebuilt everything. She leaned into television, starring in The Doris Day Show, which became a hit, and started making smart moves in real estate. She turned setbacks into strategies, heartbreak into hustle. And it worked. At the time of her death, Doris Day's estate was valued at $200 million, which in today's currency equals an astonishing $1.75 billion. Her story isn't just about success, it's about resilience. Doris didn't let Hollywood chew her up and spit her out. She evolved, adapted, and came back not just as a performer, but as a powerhouse. She reminds us all that it's never too late to take back control, rewrite your story, and rise brighter than ever. Spencer Tracy. Spencer Tracy wasn't the flashiest star in Hollywood. He didn't chase headlines or scandals, but what he did have was something far more powerful. An unwavering commitment to excellence. With over 70 films to his name, Tracy became one of the most respected actors of his time. He won 2 Academy Awards for Best Actor, one for Captain's Courageous, another for Boys Town, and was nominated an astounding 9 times. His secret? Consistency. While others came and went, Tracy stayed the course, film after film, decade after decade. But his brilliance wasn't limited to the screen. Tracy managed his career with quiet strategy, choosing roles that challenged him and contracts that rewarded him. He didn't fall into the trap of overexposure or reckless spending. He worked smart, lived well, and stayed focused. At the time of his death, Spencer Tracy's net worth was approximately $5.71 million, which equals nearly $50 million today. That figure isn't showy, but it tells the story of a man who built his fortune with purpose and patience. No gimmicks, no shortcuts, just steady, disciplined mastery. Spencer Tracy's legacy reminds us that in an industry built on spectacle, sometimes the greatest success is found in quiet brilliance. He didn't need to shout to be heard. His work spoke volumes. Marilyn Monroe. She was the dream that danced across every screen, the blonde bombshell in the white dress, the breathy voice, the magnetic presence. Marilyn Monroe didn't just become famous, she became a symbol. But behind the glittering facade was a woman whose life was far more complex than the headlines ever revealed. Marilyn captivated audiences with unforgettable roles in films like Gentlemen Prefer Blondes and Some Like It Hot. Her charisma was effortless, her allure unmatched. But fame came at a price. Despite earning an estimated $3 million during her lifetime, a substantial sum in the 1950s, her lavish lifestyle and generous spirit meant that she didn't hold on to much of it. At the time of her death, her estate was valued at just $800,000, equivalent to about $7 million today. But here's where her story takes a turn. In the decades after her passing, the world's obsession with Marilyn only grew stronger. Her image became a brand, her name a business. Licensing deals, estate management, and global fascination transformed her into a posthumous empire. Her mystique, equal parts vulnerability and glamour, became priceless. Marilyn Monroe's story is a haunting reminder of how fame can be both a gift and a burden. But it also shows us that legacy, when wrapped in magic and mystery, can outlive even the brightest stars. She may have left us too soon, but her presence still lingers, in fashion, in art, and in the collective memory of the world. Clark Gable. He didn't need a crown, just a look, a voice, and a stare that could stop time. Clark Gable wasn't just a movie star. He was the movie star. Known as the King of Hollywood, Gable embodied charisma, masculinity, and style in a way no one else could touch. From his breakout role in It Happened One Night to his immortal performance as Rhett Butler in Gone with the Wind, Gable's name became synonymous with cinematic greatness. But while fans swooned over his charm, Gable was also commanding serious money behind the scenes. He knew his worth, and he made sure the studios knew it too. Through smart contract negotiations and a relentless work ethic, Gable amassed a fortune that reached $11.4 million during his lifetime. Today, that equals around $100 million. But his wealth wasn't just about acting. It was about positioning, always selecting the right role, the right timing, the right image. He understood the business of stardom before it became common practice. Clark Gable's reign over Hollywood wasn't fueled by luck or hype. It was built on consistent brilliance, calculated decisions, and a magnetic presence that could turn dialogue into legend. Even now, decades later, his name still holds weight. Because when you rule the screen with that kind of presence, your legacy doesn't fade, it echoes.